Well, the federal opposition's finance spokesman has today committed a coalition to fully introducing a national disability insurance scheme by 2018. The current government is still not saying how that scheme would be funded, but it's keen to get legislation into Parliament to cover the launch sites agreed to at the end of last week. Our political editor, Lyndall Curtis, joins me now from Canberra. So, Lyndall, how could the government legislate before it knows how the scheme will be funded?
Well, Jenny Macklin, the minister in charge of the scheme, says the legislation will establish the National Disability Insurance Scheme. She says there are still discussions to be had about how a full scheme will be funded. And Bill Shorten, who's the Workplace Relations Minister, but was in charge of disabilities at the early stages of getting the support, building the support for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, says it will be dependent on how those launch sites that were negotiated at COAG and at the end of the last week will work. They'll help show how funding could work, how getting individualised funding can work. He said it'll be up to that and negotiations with the states. Interestingly, this morning he didn't seem to rule out completely the idea that was raised in the Productivity Commission report, although not the recommended one, and also put up at COAG at the dinner before COAG by the Queensland Premier Campbell Newman of having a levy. Bill Shorten effectively says it's too early to be making those decisions yet. He says the launch sites need to be gotten working, and he says they will demonstrate that the government is capable of coming up with an individualised system of support. And then he says the political landscape changes dramatically.
And of course, we look, the opposition, the Shadow Treasurer, Joe Hockey, he's not making any firm promises about what the coalition government would do. So what's Andrew Robb had to say?
Oh, yes, you're right. Joe Hockey has been quite cautious when talking about the National Disability Insurance Scheme, about what a coalition government could do. He's said for a number of weeks he doesn't want to be seen to raise expectations and not be able to meet them. But Andrew Robb said this morning that a coalition government would introduce the NDIS in accordance with the Productivity Commission recommendations, in accordance with getting a full scheme up and running by 2018-19. He said it's a question of priorities, removing or scaling back other programs to make room for it. And he said that a government's role is first and foremost to look after the people who have no capacity to look after themselves.
And the government has other things coming up. It's been reviewing the Fair Work Act. That review should be out soon.
Yes, Bill Shorten says that review will be out soon. It may in fact be out this week. The government's response, though, to that review will have to wait for some time. He says it will take some weeks to talk to stakeholders, to employers, to unions and to state governments about that. The government's been under pressure, particularly from business groups, to make changes to the Fair Work Act, which of course was brought in when the government scrapped the former Howard legislation of work choices. Business wants more flexibility and less union power. Mr Shorten doesn't accept some of those criticisms from business. He says the government's response will be aimed at improving productivity. He says some of that is the way you legislate, you regulate, but it also has a lot to do at the enterprise level about getting good management, about having a highly skilled workforce and about infrastructure. Now the release of the review won't only put pressure on the government to make some changes, it may also put a bit more pressure on the coalition. The coalition is quite sensitive about the issue of workplace relations because of the reaction to its work choices legislation. Tony Abbott has said some things about flexibility. He's talked about moving the industrial relations pendulum back to what he calls the sensible centre. But at this stage, we really have no idea what the coalition's proposals are for workplace relations change and what policy it would take to the next election.